Now we're getting to, one of my favorite families, the catfish family Ictaluridae. There are a lot of catfish families around the world. This is a group of fish that's had success, but we're talking about the North American catfish, which is the family Ictaluridae. That's what we're going to have here in Kentucky. So there are several species in Kentucky, probably more than you expect, because people think, well, I know a few catfish, but is there 17? Well, we're looking at the catfishes and the madtoms. And the madtoms are small, and a lot of people don't even know they exist, but they are a cool group of fish. How are we going to notice this family? Well, I mean, come on. Catfish are easy, right? The whiskers, which are really barbels. That's very obvious. Also, they don't have any scales, and they have an adipose fin. And so that makes it easy to identify the catfishes. On their pectoral fins, they have sharp spines, and usually those spines are tipped with a mild venom. So when you're handling these, you need to handle them properly so they can't stick you with the spine. You need to be careful. Is it the sort of thing that's going to kill you? Absolutely not, but it can be certainly painful. And I think the smaller the catfish, the worse it is. And I have a hypothesis that that's because their pectoral spine is small and it's almost like a syringe. So when they stick you, it goes in deeper. And it'll make you howl, and it will certainly itch for days. Because they don't have scales, or maybe the other way around, their body is covered in taste buds. So maybe they don't have scales because they have the taste buds, or maybe because they have taste buds because they have the scales. Doesn't matter. So their entire body is used for chemoreception. That's one of the reasons why if you fish for catfish, you often use stinky stuff. Not only are the barbels covered in taste buds, but the whole body is. And the larger catfish are an important commercial fish, and of course an important sport fish, and a very popular sport fish, and one of my favorites. We mentioned they got that adipose fin. The adipose fin is the first thing we can look at to tell us what kind of catfish we have. And so that adipose fin, it can be either attached or free. And so it's similar to ears. And if you look at humans, you know there's genetic conditions. So I sort of have what are, free earlobes, but there are people who have attached earlobes. If that adipose fin is free, that's what we call just a regular catfish. Whereas if it's attached, that would be a madtom. And so here we got a picture of that. Now the madtoms don't get very big. And so you might think, well, if it's just a small catfish, it's a madtom. But if it's a small catfish, maybe it's just a baby of a different species. So you've got to look at the adipose fin. Okay, so if it's free, it's our larger catfish. And so then we're going to look at the tail. And the tail will help us identify them. And if it's got a forked tail, then we know it's going to be a blue cat or a channel cat. Every once in a while you also run into a white catfish. I've never seen one. They're not super common. So we're just going to talk about blues and channels. If it's truncated, then it's going to be a bullhead or a flathead. And so the channel catfish, very popular, doesn't get very large, pretty easy to identify. It's got the forked tail. If it has spots on it, it's a channel catfish. If it's got just a couple spots, it's a channel catfish. If it's got a lot of spots, it's a channel catfish. If you see spots on it, it's going to be a channel catfish. You can also look at the anal fin. If it's rounded, that's going to be a channel catfish. And here's a picture, again, this is a rounded anal fin, but you can see the spots on there. So younger fish tend to have more spots. The older fish, the bigger channel cats, tend to lose their spots, but still they often have one or two. Now we got a forked tail, but you don't have those spots. And if you've got a squared off anal fin that looks like a comb, that's going to be a blue cat. Of course, the blue cats are the biggest catfish and can get really big. Now, if you look at channel cats, if you look at enough of these, a lot of times you can tell the male from female. Here we're looking at the heads. This is often more pronounced when they're spawning. And you see the fish on the right is going to be a male. The one on the left is going to be a female. The more pointed nose is kind of a female, whereas the more bull flathead is going to be the male. And again, if you're spawning, during spawning season, you can notice this. Another way you can sex the channel catfish is to look at the genital pore. And the males have a very small flap of skin on this genital pore that the females do not have. And it's small and it's probably not easy to really see, but you can feel it if you take the straw from a broom and gently drag it across the vent. And if it catches, it's catching on that flap of skin and you got a male. If it doesn't catch, you got a female. Well, why do we have this technique for this fish? You got to realize that channel catfish are very popular in aquaculture. If I had to guess, I'd say I'm sure they're the most cultured fish in the United States. So there's lots of effort going into raising these things and spawning them. And so there's lots of little tricks that people have learned for, you know, sexing fish so that you can spawn them. And this would be one of those tricks. And so if you look at the picture here, it's kind of showing you that very subtle flap of skin that the male has. One of the interesting things about catfish in general, certainly channel catfish, is that they do a lot of underwater communication. The channel catfish are one of the fish that have the Weberian apparatus, the modified vertebrae that transmits sound waves from their swim bladder to the otic chamber. And this presumably makes their hearing much more acute. And they also make a lot of noises to communicate with one another. One of the interesting ways that channel catfish communicate is by stridulations of their pectoral fin. And so if you look at their pectoral fin, it sits in the socket of this big bone called the clithrum. And the clithrum is a bone you run into a lot. It's one of the jaw bones in the back of the jaw. And this pectoral fin fits into the groove there in the clithrum. And if you look in this picture, you can see that that little knob that fits in there has little small grooves cut in it. And the channel catfish can rotate that or vibrate it, and it makes a noise. And they use this to communicate with other channel catfish. And in fact, if you pay attention, when you catch catfish, channel catfish, a lot of times they will make these noises and you can hear it. And so I'm going to show you, I've got a little clip of a channel catfish that I caught that's making this noise, and so you can check that out right now. Okay, so that's pretty cool. That's one way that the channel catfish communicate. I've showed you this picture already. This is an example of a catfish. Again, they're very popular culture fish. These are fish that were raised in very clear water, and so they actually got suntan. They produced a bunch of melanin to make their skin darker, to protect them from the UV lights. As I mentioned, the blue cat is the biggest catfish we have here in Kentucky. They can get huge, which makes them, they're becoming a very popular sport fish. You used to not have very big channel catfish tournaments, but now, you know, king cat and those are big tournaments. So this is Neil Jackson with a nice blue cat they sampled. Here's a nice big blue cat. This was the world record blue cat for a couple of years, and then it got broken by this 130-pound blue cat, and I think this guy only had the record for like weeks, and then his record was broken by this, which I think is the current world record, 143 pounds. What's interesting is those last three fish, I think all of those world records were taken just below the Mel Price Lock and Dam on the Mississippi River. I'm pretty sure they were all up there by Alton. I know you got a couple of really deep holes there, and for some reason it seems to be a popular spot that holds a lot of these big catfish. We've got some big ones at Kentucky Lake. All right, so channel cat, blue cat have the forked tail. If you got a truncated tail, then it's one of the, you know, it's one of the head fish, right? A flathead or a bullhead. The flathead, how are we going to identify it? Duh, it's got a flat head. It's pretty obvious. Another way to look at it, if you look at the species name, Pylodictis olivaris, the olivaris probably is in reference to the olive color mottled skin that they have on there. So they have kind of a unique coloration, but that flat head is pretty easy. You can also look, they've got a bad underbite. Their lower jaw really sticks out. And these can get big. You know, not as big as a blue cat, but these are mostly piscivorous like blue cats, so they can get larger. One of the ways that people catch these fish is noodling or hogging, which you may have heard of. This is basically where you wade along, you find holes in the bank, you stick your hand in there and you feel around, and if you feel a catfish in there, you just grab it and yank it out. Or you take a rope and you thread it through the gill cover and then tie it together and pull the fish out, right? This is not for me. This is a little crazy, but some people do it that way. You can get some big fish. You know, one of the concerns about hogging catfish is there's not a lot of data on how many fish get taken this way. You know, they're pretty vulnerable in this position. I know there have been some studies, and there's some, Missouri tried to get some data a few years ago, and I think also in Kentucky they tried to get a little data. So there's probably some data out there. But what are those fish doing? A lot of times they're guarding their nest. All catfish, all these big catfish, like to spawn in cavities. And so they lay their eggs in some sort of cavity, and then the male usually sits in there and guards it. So a lot of times when you're noodling or hogging a flathead, that's what they're doing, is they're back in there guarding the eggs. And so you might be pulling that fish off the nest. I am not aware that this is a serious threat to their population. I don't have any data one way or the other. And I don't know that a lot of people do this. So I don't think it's anything to get in a twist about, at least yet. I do think it's crazy. I wouldn't do it. Okay, so if we're trying to identify these catfish that have the flat tail, the other group would be the bullheads, right? They both have truncate tails. The flathead catfish has got a flat head. If it's not a flathead, then it's a bullhead. And we've got three species of bullhead: the yellow bullhead, the black bullhead, and the brown bullhead. And they're all very similar fish. They're common, they don't get very big, and we identify them by looking at their chin barbels. The yellow bullhead has light chin barbels, the black bullhead has dark chin barbels, the brown bullhead also has dark chin barbels, but the brown bullhead has really unique coloration, and it's this really cool looking modeling. So when you pull up a brown bullhead, you notice it right away. But also you can feel the pectoral spine of the brown bullhead. It's got serrations on there. It's rough, whereas the other two, it's not rough. And other terms for the bullheads are mudcats or yellow bellies. So if you hear people talking about mudcats, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about bullheads. So here's a yellow bullhead. You see the light chin barbels. Here's a black bullhead with the dark chin barbels. And here's a brown bullhead with that unique coloration. So this coloration pretty much gives them away, but again, you can also feel that rough pectoral spine. And that's what I'm showing you here. This is a picture of the pectoral spine of the brown bullhead. Okay. So that's it for the big catfish. Now let's talk about the small catfish, the madtoms. These are smaller, they live in riffles, they live in streams. They're very nocturnal. And so for these two reasons, that's why people a lot of times aren't aware of them, because they don't run into them, because they really hunker down during the day, bury themselves in the gravel, hide under overcut banks. And if people do run into them, they often just think that they're just babies of, you know, mud cats or other fish, but they're not. And they're really, really interesting, really beautiful fish. So I love the Madtoms. And I just mentioned that we look at the pectoral spine to identify the brown bullhead. And the pectoral spines are also very useful for identifying the Madtoms. And in fact, most Madtoms have a unique pectoral spine, and most keys have drawings of these spines, and so you can use that pectoral spine to identify the species. And so we've got a lot of species of Madtom in Kentucky. For our quizzes, we don't have a whole lot in the collection yet. I'm trying to get more, and so we're only going to have 3 that I want you to know for the quizzes, but as we build this collection, we'll have more of those. The first one is a stone cat, and the stone cats are one of the bigger Madtoms. They're pretty common. You see a picture of their pectoral spine here. An easy way to identify the stone cat is they're the opposite of a flathead. They have an overbite instead of an underbite. Pretty obviously the upper jaw projects. And here's another picture of that. But what really identifies these is if you look at the tooth patches inside their upper mouth. And you just, the easiest thing to do is just cut the bottom jaw off so you can expose this. You can open the mouth and look, but if you just cut that jaw off. And the stone cat's the only one that has these backward projecting horns on the side. A lot of the other Madtoms will just have a rectangular patch, but you see you've got those horns that poke back. That's a stone cat. A very pretty Madtom we have around here is the Brindled Madtom, and it's got these saddles on the back, this mottled coloration, and if you look at their pectoral spine, they've got serrae on the anterior part, on the front of the pectoral spine as well as on the back. And on the back of the posterior portion of the pelvic or the pectoral spine is a little bit more curved, and those serrae on the back kind of curve in toward the body. So you can kind of feel that to help you identify it, but the coloration usually gives away the Brindled Madtom. A Madtom that we have here around Murray and nowhere else in the state is the brown Madtom. We get a lot of these in Terrapin Creek, and I think that's the only place in Kentucky where you get them. They're common in Tennessee, it's just that they're not common in Kentucky. The brown Madtom is just a kind of more of a plain little one. If you look at the pectoral spine, it does not have any serrae on the front of that pectoral spine. It's got them on the back. The back margin of that pectoral spine is more straight across, whereas it was curved in the Brindled Madtom. So these will be pretty easy for you to identify on the quiz. Now, I mentioned that the Madtoms tend to be very nocturnal, and I had one in a tank for a longest time, and I would go weeks without seeing it, and I think it was dead. And then I'd do a water change, and here it would pop out from somewhere. So I witnessed this, and so one day I thought it'd be interesting to see when he did come out. And so what I'm going to show you here is a video I took. I had a camcorder with night vision on it, and I set it up in front of my tank, and then I turned off the lights and went upstairs. And you'll see pretty quickly that as soon as the lights go out, that stone cat came out and started roaming around. So take a look at this. All right, so that was a great fish. I love that fish. So this last thing here is a little story. This is something interesting. A good friend of mine who studies Japanese passed this on to me, and this was in a book he had, and he was reading this to me and telling me that this is a folk tale in Japan. And the story goes is that Japan is sitting on a giant catfish named Namzu. And so Namzu is this big catfish, and I love these illustrations here. You see all these catfish in kimonos that are like worshiping the giant catfish. Well, this guy in this picture who's standing on the back of the catfish, he's a god named Kashima, and this guy's job is to hold down and to subdue this giant catfish, and he does it by holding a rock on his head and pins him down. The problem is he gets bored or he doesn't pay attention, and every once in a while he lets up and the catfish starts thrashing around. And the folktale is this is what causes earthquakes. And so you know that Japan has a lot of earthquakes, and so this is how they would explain it, is this god is not paying attention and this catfish is thrashing around, and that's why the earth is quaking. And so that's what this picture is showing. And this is interesting. In this picture you see a lot of the people attacking the catfish because he's, you know, destroying, he's causing an earthquake, which upsets a lot of them. But you see some of the other people are rushing to the catfish's aid. These are the carpenters and things, because they benefit from the earthquakes because they get a lot of business after that. So this is just something that my friend showed me. I think it's pretty cool. Okay, so that's a brief introduction to the North American catfishes. We could talk catfishes all day, but we don't have time. So these are the ones I want you to know for the quiz. Let me know if you got any questions. I'll see you in the next presentation. So later.